This is the fourth and final video for walking you through how to use Grasshopper as part of a fabrication process. And in this video, we've got everything already laid out, ready to be laser cut, with one little exception is that we probably want to label these because as of right now, as soon as we cut them, it's going to be very confusing, or we might get a little bit disoriented about what is which point in here. And this is going to be actually the easiest of all the processes through here. So to do this, we've started a new panel here, a new paragraph, if you will, and we're going to tag all of our contour curves here, all of our individual layers. The whole premise behind all of this, or the whole base behind all of this, is going to the, excuse me, it takes me a second to remember where it is, go underneath the display tab, and we're going to go to dimensions and text tag 3D. We want to use the text tag 3D, it just gives us more options within it. And you'll see this is another one of those components that there is no actual output. We haven't done anything yet, but at some point we are going to have to make this Rhino geometry. When you click on those Grasshopper objects in the Rhino screen, you can't actually click on them. To do that, we want to go through a process called baking. We're going to need to bake the laid out contours, and we're also going to need to bake these tags. And I'll show you how to do that in just a little moment. So to get through this, though, you'll see that there are 5 inputs here. The actual location of the tag that we want to put in there, the text we want the tag to say, the size, the color, and the justification. Now the color is not super important, but I'll show you how to adjust that. Obviously the location is pretty critical, but we've already got that geometry. That location is just simply a point location, and we already have that. The points that we're going to use for this example at least are going to be those points that we, in the lower left corners, that we used for the layout. So if we go up a step, we created all these points up here. We created a series of numbers and these points. We're going to use these points as those locations. So what we want to do is bring those points down below here. The easiest way to do that is go to Parameters tab, Geometry, and use a point container. Wire that in. We're going to call these our XY points. I want to make this a wireless receiver and bring this down below. So easy enough, we can go ahead and wire that straight into the L for the location of the text tag. Okay. The actual tag itself, we're going to skip that for a moment. We'll come back to that because that's actually the most complex part of this, is to create a series of numbers and kind of work our way through there. The S is the size. Let's go ahead and use a slider to be able to adjust that on the fly. And I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, I don't necessarily want to have less than 1. So I'm going to go ahead and make the minimum value of the slider as 1, and maybe the upper limit of the slider as 10. I'm going to call this my text size. And we're going to wire that directly into the S input, like so. And now that'll be dynamic, so we can kind of adjust that as we need to. The color is easy. All you have to do is go into Parameters, go to Input, and use a color swatch. And you can adjust that color to anything that you want. I'm going to call this, instead of swatch, my text color. And to change it, just double click on the white. And you can go ahead and kind of adjust your RGB values to make it any color that you want it to be. It doesn't really matter what it is for this example. You can also click up here and move these around and just go ahead and accept that. The justification, the easiest way to do this is just to simply right click. And you can see where you want the text to be in the bottom left or upper right, what have you. We're going to go ahead and just leave it. Let's actually do upper right for right now, top right, and that'll adjust that location. Now we actually have to create the text. And what we want to do is just simply count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so on. Well, if you remember in this last example, to count we used a series component, started with a certain start point, a step size, and a number of counts. So to do that again, we're going to drop in a new series component, go to Sets, Sequence, and Series. The S input is the starting point. We probably don't want to start counting with 0, because unless you're a computer, we normally start counting with 1. To do that, let's go to Parameters, drop in a panel tool, just set the value of 1 in there. Again, don't hit Enter, don't hit Spacebar, and run that into there. The N is the step size, which is good. We want to go ahead and step by 1. And the C is the actual count. How many do we want to count up to? In this case, we want to count by however many layers we have. And we know how many layers we have based off of this list length component, because this already counted the number of levels or layers that we have. Here it's 42. Again, we could wire it down below, but then the wires get a little bit tricky. That's simply a number component. So what we want to do is go to the primitive here, and you want to use either a number or an integer, depending on what it is. You'd either number for anything that has a decimal or integer for all whole numbers. We know this is always going to be an integer because you'll never have a portion or a fraction of a level. So we're going to use an integer component. I'm going to wire that in. I'm going to call this my number of layers. Again, wire display for hidden, and wire this, bring this down below and wire it into the C input, the count input. So now if I hover over my S, you'll see it starts counting 0. That's just dropping a panel. It starts counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I wire that directly into the text tag, there we go. In the lower left corner, we have all that information. A couple things. The upper right was probably a bad one. Justification, we want the actual point to be in the lower left so that the text moves to the upper right. So let's right click on justification again. Let's set this one for now bottom left, and that will push the actual text into the upper right corner. There we go. The size is pretty good, but we could always adjust that if we want to. So we can use this to make it larger or smaller. The other thing that's a little bit odd is that we actually have decimal points, and we'll never use the decimal point, but you'll see as a result of the series gives us a decimal point location. To get rid of that, there's a couple different ways, but the easiest way to do is, again, to use that integer component and simply run your count through the integer. And because this is an integer, it automatically drops that decimal point. So you can just run that straight now and replace the old text. And now it gets rid of all those individual decimal points. If you want smaller text, just simply double click on the text size and reduce the minimum from, say, 1 to maybe 0.5. And now you can go ahead and make them a little bit smaller as you need to. Now the last step is probably potentially one of the most important, is how to make this Rhino geometry. So what I'm going to do for a moment, I'm just going to minimize my Rhino screen. Over here I'm going to label a couple of my layers just to have those well organized. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and label layer 01, and I'm going to relabel this as my my cuts. Those are my laser cuts. And then layer 2, let's go ahead and call those my labels. And I want to etch those. Okay. And again, because it's important, you may want to change the colors to make sure these coincide with kind of true colors within the laser cutters. So the RGB 0, 255 or zeros. Red is good, and I just go ahead and set that to an actual green color. Okay. Now we went ahead and I'm going to maximize my grasshopper screen. You'll see it's here in the lower left. So I'm going to go ahead and just maximize that, or sorry, let's just dock it over here. And it does have a text color to it, but we may not want to do that because we want the color of the layer to override it. You could set the color here if you wanted to, so I could set this to 0, 255, 0 to set it to true green, like so. But you'll notice that the color is going to be dictated by the object here and not by the individual layers. To bake geometry, it's real easy. The things that we're going to want to bake are obviously the text tags, but also all these moved, laid out geometries along the x-axis. To do that, all you do is you simply right-click on the word move on the body of the component that you want to bake. Go to bake in the middle here. Dialog box will pop up. Select the layer you want to put it on. In this case, I'm baking the actual contour line, so I'm going to set that in the cuts layer. It'll ask if you want to group things, how you want to display things, all that kind of good stuff. I don't necessarily want to group anything. I don't want them all as one group. So I'm just going to go ahead and select the layer. I'm going to leave all these as default and hit OK. And now you'll see when I turn off the preview for all this stuff, you have actual Rhino geometry that I can select, and I can go ahead and have that laser cut. I'm going to do the same thing down below here. I'm going to go in here, I'm going to go ahead and select the actual text tag. I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to bake. I'm going to put that on my labels etch layer, hit OK. And now I'm going to turn off this entire layer. And now you'll see when I go ahead and click on those, they're all actual geometry or tags in Rhino. I can double click and relabel these if I need to in Rhino. Okay, but you've broken that parametric link. Now if I go ahead and make any adjustments, you'll notice that these are Rhino geometry. So if I go in here and we look back at my section lines, and I decide at this point, hey, now I want to go ahead and make more or less contours. These here are not going to update, okay? You're going to have to turn back on the preview for the rhino or grasshopper geometry and rebake those. As soon as you bake, you've broken the parametric link, so the objects in rhino now are stagnant. You'll also notice that because these are editable geometries, you won't be able to laser cut them. You'll have to actually explode them, but that's pretty easy. Just right-click, select all the text tag. Whoop, excuse me. Let's do that again. Right-click, select objects, and you can go ahead and explode those. In this case, I want to go ahead and explode or select the objects for the etch layer and explode those. And when you explode them, they turn into vector outlines, and you can go ahead and laser etch those vector outlines real easily. Okay? So again, once you've done all this, you want to go ahead and make sure that you actually save this entire file. And then this file you're going to upload. So I'm going to do a file, save as, follow all your normal standard naming conventions. And this is the file that I actually want to have you guys upload to the Carmen assignments site here. So you go ahead and upload this into assignment 4. Make sure your name is on it. You don't have to do anything other than watch this video, follow along, and upload your file, and you'll get the full credit for it as long as you've done it properly and followed along the video properly. If you have any questions, you're always welcome to email me. Hopefully the videos, I know they went through fast, but you should be able to watch them kind of at your own pace. And hopefully you're able to kind of keep up, learn a little bit of Grasshopper, and see how Grasshopper can help us with some fabrication tools.